And we're back with the Hammer Podcast. That's right, friends. That's right, Hammerheads. We're back in the saddle and ready to roll here at the Excellence in Pastoral Broadcasting Network. Half our theological brains are tied behind our backs just to give the Arminians a fighting chance. That's right. We know you Arminians like to come here and join the party. You even tried to hack our episode long ago. But we're glad you're here. Today's topic is to pay or not to pay taxes.
Not.
That is the question. So as we begin today's topic, thinking about Christians in the public square, specifically, we wanted to talk about Christians and taxes. And, last week someone had asked if a Christian is biblically obligated to pay taxes when the government uses the money to fund murder, abortions. But if the government's, using our taxpayer dollars to fund abortions, should a Christian be biblically obligated to pay them? But you had mentioned, and as we were doing our show prep,
Yes.
that you wanted to go beyond that and actually talk about what the Bible says about taxes and fair taxes.
Yes. We'll see how far we get today, but taxes should be a major factor for the Christian when it comes to voting. Right?
Yeah.
Because taxes tell us a lot about the priority of the government, just as where you or I spend our money says a lot about us.
Yeah, right.
I've also, for the last few years, encouraged all people, but particularly younger folks, to study taxes. The issue of abortion alone should keep any Christian away from the Democratic Party, obviously. Okay.
Well,
I mean,
not to the French, David French and Russell Moore.
That's the problem. Obviously, our hammerheads, anybody that comes to church here, they're going to be with us on that because that's so basic.
Right.
But what an eye-opener when you see the development of taxes in our nation, how much people pay in taxes today, and where that tax money goes.
Oh, yeah, it's crazy. The tax money's going everywhere. What are you, $34 or $32 trillion in debt?
Right.
But your hard-earned money.
Yeah, and look, I don't know of anyone who has studied taxes that emerges from that study and is in any way politically liberal, shall we say. So I think it's a good study. I think we ought to know enough about what's going on in that area. And look, when you're dealing with younger folks, I'm saying 18, early 20s, you're dealing with some of them that they maybe haven't gotten a paycheck.
And seen the tax line come out?
Right. Some of them aren't paying, mom and dad are still paying the rent or whatever, or they're living on campus and that bill eventually will come due, but,
It's until you see it, it doesn't matter, right?
Right. So they're not thinking that way. They maybe don't have children yet. They're not thinking about all these things. And, of course, that's why most young folks, and I'm not talking about necessarily Christians, although it certainly bleeds over into that, but most young folks are what?
Yeah.
Very, very liberal and always have been for more or less the Democratic Party, right?
Right. Look at the campuses. They're having peaceful demonstrations
yes.
all across the country right
and
now.
You go all the way
campuses.
back to the 60s, right? And where were they, right? They were on the liberal side, obviously.
Right.
So that's going to happen. But then all of a sudden people get jobs, at least in the old days, people would get jobs that weren't necessarily for the government, right? Mm-hmm. And they would begin to look and say, wait a minute, time out. What's going on with this?
Yeah.
So...
Well, okay, all right. Before we get too far into the details and the finer points of taxes in general, let's go to the question of should a Christian, whether a Christian is biblically obligated to pay taxes if that tax dollars are being used for the murder of our unborn children?
Yeah, that's right. And, of course, we can add to abortions, the so-called sex reassignment.
No. Gender affirmation. It's a
Yes.
gracious
Wait a minute.
act. We're
Yes.
affirming their gender confusion.
Yes. Puberty blockers. I guess we have another nice word for that, right?
Right. Well, that's part of the affirmation
but,
care because
yeah.
we want to allow their manifestation to come to reality.
What a world we live in, huh?
Yeah.
Come, Lord Jesus. Well, listen, so we can add all that into that, but this question I think we're going to see as we try to answer it, is maybe a little more complicated than we first think.
Right.
But we're going to try to walk through it, and we're not going to be the final authority on this, right? I mean, people are going to have to read God's word and then go with what they think God's word is teaching,
right,
and answer for that. We certainly, that's all we're trying to do here, but we're discussing it and trying to bring up some items that maybe not everyone has thought about in this debate.
Well, and I think it's good for us to be, if the men of Issachar, right, they were aware of their times, right?
Yes.
We want to be men and women that are aware of the times we're in, that can think clearly, right? Apply the Bible to all situations and stand with confidence and boldness.
Right. All right, so let's get started. So let's say this. First, the first fact to lay out here is that tax money is used for abortion and some of the other atrocities we just mentioned, okay? But it is. In other words, that's a fact. This isn't like, what if, this happens? I mean, because this used to be a theoretical question. Some years back, Christians would ask these questions. I think tax money actually was used to help support abortion much earlier than we think or that we were aware of, okay? But it's been happening for quite some time now. And in fact, years ago, if we were to analyze where tax money was going, we could find some very evil things that were supported through tax money.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the further you dig into it, there's lots of atrocities that are our dollars are being used for.
Yes.
But, okay, first, let's deal with what the Bible, because it is our sole authority, what does the Bible tell us about paying Uncle Sam or taxes?
Right. Well, the Old Testament gives a lot of insight into how God thought about taxes, and we'll touch more on that later. But no doubt when we think of the believer and paying taxes, we think of two primary New Testament passages.
Right. The hammerheads already have them memorized. We don't even need to
cite
them. But for our Arminian friends out there, we know that you might need to have the read. So we'll read them.
That's right. Romans 13 and Mark 12, most specifically verse 17. But I'll start with Mark, right? Because this is Jesus' words. Right. And we know the context here is important, right? The context, once again, the Pharisees think they're going to trick Jesus. And so they come up to him. We'll just begin
the SBI?
That's right. We'll begin in verse 16. Okay, and they brought one, so they bring this coin, right, Roman coin, and he said to them, because the question is, do we have to pay taxes? So, okay, give me a coin, right? And he said to them, whose likeness and inscription is this? And they said to him, well, it's Caesar's. Jesus said to them, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they marveled at him. Now, maybe the most remarkable thing here about this text is that they marveled at him. I mean, that wouldn't seem to be like what he said was right. Like, is this really a deep insight? But of course, the reason they marvel at him is because the object lesson, and then I often preach about this, I just wish we could see when Jesus taught, not only was his content perfect, but his demeanor, every illustration, every use of his body language.
Right, his pathos, his ethos, everything
about
it.
Right, all of that, right? And so the people watching this live, seeing this, are marveling because of all of those things, and we would too if we could see it. But nonetheless, Jesus clearly says here that the question is, do we have to pay taxes, right? Should we pay taxes to Caesar? He answers that question, okay? So we're familiar with that. But then we get to the Gospels, and nothing has changed on this because Paul, in Romans 13, right, verse 7, pay to all what is owed to them. Taxes to whom taxes are owed. Revenue to whom revenue is owed. Respect to whom respect is owed. Honor to whom honor is owed.
Right. So, I mean,
so the Bible,
right.
So the New Testament's clear on this aspect.
Right. They're both Jesus and Paul are saying, have something to say about taxes.
Yes.
And like we were saying, the SBI, kind of like other three-letter agencies in our current day and age, we're trying to trick Jesus with the question about taxes.
That's right.
Kind of like asking someone, well, when did you stop stealing?
Right.
Right? But it's
the implication is you always have or you did, so when did you stop? Yeah.
Right. Exactly. But I think it helps us realize that no one's ever been yippee-skippy happy about paying taxes. There's always been some sort of a resistance
but
point.
the only people that are, again, as we say, maybe the young people just entering college who think this is a great idea. And in fact, everybody should pay more until it's them, you know? Because they even think people should be paying for their schooling, you know? So anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with the peaceful demonstrations, that
Yes.
makes it all the more clear that schooling should be free for everyone in America.
Exactly, because they're actually learning some obviously really good truth there.
Yes, wonderful things.
Yeah, but look, right, no one's ever liked to pay taxes, right? Now, I want to point out a few things here with each of these verses, right? First, with Mark, Jesus clearly says, render to Caesar what? The things that are Caesar's. He did not say give everything to Caesar, right? So we don't have a percentage there. Second, Paul sort of echoes this by saying pay to all what is owed them. Taxes to whom taxes are owed. So we might ask, what exactly or how much is owed the government? How much is owed Caesar? How much should we pay Caesar?
Yeah. So, I mean, the implication is that Caesar is entitled, which is such a special word.
Yeah.
He was entitled to something because it says the word taxes are owed. But like as you're posing the question, I think all of our hammerheads, because they're not knuckleheads,
That's right.
you know, they're asking the question, well how much?
Exactly.
Right? How much is he owed? Is the authority above us owed for us
That's
to pay?
right. Neither Jesus nor Paul give percentages, but the implication is that there should be an expectation that something is owed, something is Caesar's, something is the government, right? And in Jesus' words, by the way, I hear echoes of the Old Testament in regards to taxes, and so we're going to get there eventually because it's important. So he says, render to Caesar what's Caesar's, but to God what's God's. There's echoes there of the Old Testament, which eventually we will get to, if not in this episode, the next.
Yeah, no, that's good. All right, well, so for some of the snowflakes that might have turned into the podcast, we want to help bring you along in your understanding. And so one of the thoughts that they might have is, how do we even know that taxpayer money is being used for abortions? Right?
Yes.
Like, we're making this case. It sounds like this evil monster, but how do you know that? Well, that's a good question to ask. How do we know that?
Right. So it is hard to get exact numbers, as you can imagine. But
Wait, really?
But just for example, I'll give you some data that is a few years old, but it serves our purposes. Again, it's hard to get transparent information for what the government spends and where they spend it.
Yeah, it's shocking. We're not sure where all the money went to Ukraine either. But we'll never. That's not the topic today.
Right. Yes. Now, look, it often takes several years to get real figures. Mm-hmm. It might be 2-3 years before they kind of release figures. But then again, this is the same government that won't release, the contents in the vaccine, for what? 60, 70 years, whatever. But I'm sure they're not trying to hide anything.
Nothing. Nothing to see there. Hiding it for 60 to 70 years is not a big deal.
But again, we digress. So these are the numbers from 2019 through 2021. All right. Now, the numbers I'm about to give you only represent how much Planned Murderhood, they like to call themselves
it's Planned Parenthood,
right?
Yeah. It's such a gentle way to paint murder.
Right. But look, it only represents how much Planned Murderhood has gotten as far as tax money in 2019 to 21. In other words, there are other avenues where tax money is funneled and used for abortions and other such atrocities, right?
Right.
But this alone should startle us. Okay, think about this. Between 2019 and 21, Planned Murderhood, received $1.78 billion in federal funding.
B with billion, B with a B.
Right, that averages out to $592 million each year. Now, you can rest assured that these numbers are the minimum.
Yeah.
because you can rest assured that there's some funny business going on where they actually got more. So let me say that again: 1.78 billion in federal funding. That is tax money.
Yeah.
1.78 billion in tax money.
Yeah, money that you and all the other hammerheads worked hard to earn.
That's right.
You're right.
Okay, to the tune of an average of 592 million a year. All right, now think about this also. I ran across this and double checked, triple checked, but during the COVID-19 time frame, Planned Parenthood received over $90 million in forgiven paycheck protection program loans. In other words, otherwise known as PPP. But here's why this is crazy. Okay, so Planned Parenthood gets over $90 million, the PPP loans. But here's what's interesting about this: Congress only intended these PPP funds to assist independent small businesses with less than 500 employees. It was never meant to be used for an organization like Planned Parenthood. Frankly, I don't think it should have ever been used for churches, and there were a lot of churches that used that, and wouldn't you know, they happen to be there's some that are within a rock's throwing distance from our studio right here, which happens to be on the grounds of our church.
That's right.
And wouldn't you know, these were the same churches that were all about, hey, whatever the
Vaccines.
whatever the government says, let's do. Well, yeah, right, because you're kind of in cahoots with them. You're taking money from them. Okay,
right.
We weren't about to do that, but so just think about all this. Okay, now in 2019, the Trump administration issued what was called the Protect Life Rule. I don't even know that everybody knows, about that. But
wait, the orange man bad? Wait. Hold on. Screech it to a halt. Orange man bad, who is now in a courtroom in New York.
Somewhere in a courtroom.
Well, on the day this will go out, he will be in a courtroom. He issued a Protect Life rule. He was trying to protect life?
Yeah, he was trying to protect life. Now, so the Trump administration issues this rule, all right, and what it did was, and it was tied into, all the Title IX stuff we hear about and all that, right? So, but it required all those who would receive funding, right, from Title IX, it received all of them. Would have to agree to not refer people for abortions. Okay, now
which a lot of the Title IX goes to schools,
right? And
colleges.
And the reason this was neat is because during the Obama administration, for instance, Planned Murderhood was the second largest source of federal funding under the same title. Okay,
that's staggering.
Right.
Continue.
Now. Okay, so Title IX has been used in the news recently, by the way.
I think our current occupant of the White House has done some things with Title IX and transgenderism.
Right, and so what's going to happen is you're going to see all this tax money funneled through this so-called Title IX, not just used for abortions, but for the mutilation of children and so forth.
The gender affirmation, it's affirmation care.
Yeah,
Come on,
so
guys.
Look, for years, there's been agreement. I mean, even still recently, and we know polls can say whatever, but I mean, the majority of Americans oppose federal tax dollars funding abortions. Okay, but so this is merely one example, of our tax money going. Again, $1.78 billion between 2019 and 21 went to Planned Murderhood in our tax money. That's almost $600 million a year, just in those 3 years. And again, that's just one avenue. There are many other avenues where
money's funneled. Well, I mean, even the PPP loans, the $90 million is on top of the 1.78
that's right.
bill.
So this is merely one example, all right? And a lot of our younger folks may not know this, so it's important for them to know this. But they'll come up with some bill. See, this is what the government does, right? They'll come up with some bill, and they'll say, this bill, let's just go to, without any further comments, let's say they say there's going to be an aid bill for Ukraine, for instance, and let's say it's $100 million in total. I realize most of the bills are larger than that, but I'm just to pick a number.
Yeah.
So, hey, we have this bill. It's an aid bill for Ukraine, and it's $100 million. Well, you look at that, and if you were really to look at the details, you might find that only $50 million is going to Ukraine. And then you read the fine print, and you find out $20 million is going for abortion and mutilation of children and what have you. This sort of thing happens all the time, and you're saying, wait a minute, I heard this was a Ukraine bill. I never heard anything about abortion, about mutilation of children. This is how the government works, folks.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And it happens all the time.
Yeah, and this is why people need to know the truth, which reminds me of our sponsor. The truth. You need it. Okay, so now we see how the tax money goes towards such atrocities as abortion, child mutilation, pick your, fancy. So then how do we handle this as a Christian? Do we pay taxes? What are we supposed to do? It's clearly happening.
Right. Yes.
Right?
Okay, so we have two facts here, right? One is that God's word tells us to pay taxes.
Right.
Right? The other is that our government, and we know it, it's public knowledge. We just talked about it, gave an example. Our government uses money to pay for the murder of unborn babies, to pay for the murder of those created in the image, conceived in the image of God.
Right.
All right? Now, part of the problem here, however, is that it is not itemized. When I get my bill for property tax on my car, I know it's for my car.
Right.
Specific tax, which isn't biblical, but we'll deal with that later, but a specific tax for a specific item. If I get a bill, let's just say for $100 for my car, I know it's for my car. It's very specific, but all of our taxes don't work this way, which is part of the problem.
Right. That would make it much easier if there was an itemized receipt.
Well, yes, it would. Look, if I got a tax bill specifically for $100 that said for abortion, if you got that, if any believer got that, right? Well, then at that point, we can say, no, I'm not paying for this. Mm-hmm. There's no possible way before God I can send this $100 check in to the government knowing it's being specifically used for an abortion, right?
Yeah.
However, that's not how it is. Everything's lumped together. I mean, we don't even know the amount and how much of your tax money it goes towards abortion versus my tax money versus the lady or man next to us. Well, it all depends on how much we each earn, and there's percentages, right? So, I mean, how would you ever, figure all of this out?
Yeah. But yet in principle, if a believer would not pay a specific itemized tax bill, then why would we pay taxes when we know that it is in somehow embedded into it?
Right, exactly. And that's why I said this question is a little more difficult than it first seems, because most believers, I think, are going to say, to that question of does a believer have to pay taxes if we know that it's going towards abortion and so forth, or at least a portion thereof. Most believers are going to say, well, I mean, yeah, you have to pay taxes because Jesus said you have to pay taxes. Paul said you have to pay taxes, right? You will have some extreme believers that say, no, believers don't have to, though I assume even most of those, they do.
Right, yeah.
Or else we'd be
do.
visiting them in jail, right?
Right.
So,
what is the answer? That's the real question.
Right, is then, a believer, right? Do they have to pay taxes in this situation? It's not easy. Now, I can only give my opinion here. I can't answer for everyone. Hammerheads have to make up their own minds. All right? I think, however, we have to bring wisdom into this. Okay, the government takes taxes from us, and it gets used for police, for instance, and we are not among those who believe we should defund.
No, we like the police.
The police, right?
Right.
Okay.
Blue lives matter.
Yeah, only idiots think that. We're very supportive of the men and women in blue around here. Okay? Now,
amen.
So the government takes tax money for law enforcement and some other services that are worthwhile, right? But out of that same lump, money comes is taking financial support, right? They take our tax money out for abortions and such. So I think the wisdom piece here is this, what happens if you don't pay taxes?
Well, you get fined, and eventually you go to jail. Unless of course, the Reverend Al Sharpton.
Yeah. It's amazing how people like him get away with tax evasion and such, right? But exactly. So, I mean, look, you're called to provide for your family, right?
Right.
We're all called biblically to provide for our family. And that does play into the percentage of taxes, and I think that'll probably be, we'll have to wait till next episode to get that, but we're called, you're an infidel.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
If you don't provide for your family.
If you don't provide for your family.
Right.
Well, what do you do then when when the government's taking all your money to the point where you can't? Well, we'll talk about that the next time. But for our purposes here, okay, we have to provide for our family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that means we have to have a job.
Mm-hmm.
Now, unless you're self-employed, right, your employer takes taxes. In other words, you're not. I mean, there are some people that have jobs that they have to figure out. They have to pay their own taxes and everything, right? Most people listening to this probably, if they work, they have an employer who does all of that. So by the time you get your paycheck, you look at it, the taxes have already been taken out. You didn't really have any say in that. If you did, you might, say no, because you see how much is taken out.
Right.
I loved when my boys began, working. I mean, they'd get paid under the table and this and that. But finally, when they get their first actual paycheck, I mean, they were already, I think, mom and dad had done a good job teaching them about things. So they already had a certain viewpoint.
Sure. But
that was just cemented when they looked at their paycheck. It was like, yes, everything mom and dad has said is true.
Eureka.
And they were, I'm talking about outraged and did nothing but complain. And I think one of them was even like, I don't even know why I work. So
yeah.
It was a good teaching moment. But anyway,
lesson there is get your sons and daughters get them a paycheck so they can see this.
Yeah, don't do everything for them. Okay, but anyway, that's for the parenting.
Yeah, that's
podcast.
Hammerhead parents.
But here's my point. So you have a job. They take the taxes out. You don't. So what are you going to do?
Yeah.
So what are you going to do? Go to an employer and say, hey, I want this job and I'll work for you, but don't take my taxes out. Well, they're not going to do that because then they're liable.
Yeah.
Now they're going to be in trouble, right? So it's just not reasonable and feasible for most believers to say, I'm not going to pay taxes and then go try to implement that. Now, somebody here will be listening to this and say, well, I'm self-employed and so I'm not going to, okay. I mean, I guess, but again, where's that going to end?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And look, so I think what we should do, part of what we should do is, we should demand, I don't think the government's going to do it. I mean, Democrats aren't going to do it. I don't even think you're going to get most of the Republicans to do it, right? But we should demand that we know where our tax money's going.
Right. Well, and that's one of the things, too, in demanding that we know it, we need accountability for our elected officials when they vote to send that money to those places, right? So we need to have, instead of just having these joint votes where they just say yay or nay, there needs to be roll call votes.
Yeah.
So the people that we send to Congress to represent us, we know what they're voting for and where they're sending our money.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So, we should know, then we would know, like it should be itemized for us.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Where we see that, hey, I'm $100 per year, whatever, right, is of my tax money is going towards abortion.
Right.
Well, now I'm not going to pay that 100, right? So that would be a different conversation that we could have. But you see where this is not really an easy question, right? Because clearly if it was itemized or if we got a separate bill for abortion or mutilation of children, right, a separate tax bill, we're not paying it, right?
Right. We could say, I'm not here to support the mutilation of our children.
Then somebody's going to say, well, wait a minute, but so the principle is, no, you don't want to pay for that. Well, you're still paying for that when you pay for taxes, even though it's not itemized. So therefore, somehow, some way, we shouldn't pay taxes, right? And I understand that sentiment. But then I'm saying, where does that end? So that's where the wisdom piece comes in, right? Because, look, I can't provide for my family if I'm in jail.
Yeah, right. If you're in jail, you're no good to the family.
Right. So these things, I mean, we have to think about this, and I think it takes great wisdom. I don't think there's just, one easy answer here.
Yeah. No, Jesus said, pay to Caesar what is his. But the question he asked was not, should we pay taxes when we know the money's being used to murder children or mutilate our children, right? That's what makes it such a difficult place to be in, and it requires, as you said, great wisdom. Right,
exactly. Because, again, just going back to what you said, right? We look at Scripture, that the question posed to Jesus is not the exact same question we're asking.
No,
and that's
not at
what
all.
we always have to do when we bring Scripture to bear. We have to contextualize the Scripture, right? Put it in its context, and make sure we're asking the same question. Or if it's slightly different, we have to make sure we understand that nuance when it
and
comes.
how it applies.
Right. And here's an example, right? Because, again, they did say, hey, should we pay taxes to Caesar who's going to use this money for abortion or for murder of babies? Well, that wasn't his question. That wasn't the question, right? Nor was it, hey, should we pay this, $5 abortion murder tax? That wasn't the question that was asked. So that's where this can get, again, a little more difficult for us, and we really, really have to think about that. You know?
Okay, so some of the hammerheads, or maybe they finally got their friends to give us a like and a share, and they followed, so they're listening right now, and they're hearing all of this for the first time, and their conscience is just overwhelmed, right, with the fact that their hard-earned money would go towards mutilating children and murdering the unborn in our nation.
Yeah.
And so they're just like, look, my conscience can't handle this. I can't.
Yes.
I don't know. I can't care about any consequence. I just can't do this. My conscience is overwhelmed. I cannot pay.
Right.
What would you say to them?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say that I'm with you on that. It's just disgusting to think that
I mean, I feel like you need to
money
take
would
a shower.
be used that way, right? Yeah.
Right.
But I would say this to that brother or sister. First of all, we're not the first believers who've had to deal with something like this, right? I mean, look, believers in Jesus' day and in Paul's day paid taxes. How much of their tax money went towards, for instance, orgies and wild parties sponsored by government officials?
That didn't happen then. Come on.
Yeah, right. Well,
look at these guys.
So should they have not paid taxes, right? So we have to understand, like, this isn't new.
Right.
We're not like the first people that have had to think about this and be concerned with this and that sort of thing, right? Now, I think here's what I would say. We have to remember that we are not directly responsible for how the government uses our tax money. Now, the word directly here is important. I didn't say we're not responsible at all, because that's where voting comes in.
Right.
Right? We don't, unlike Paul, we have a vote.
Right. We have a vote.
Okay? We live in a republic where we can vote. Now, so that's why I said directly, because in our context, we should be educated and taking all of this into account when we go into the voting booth.
Right.
Okay, that's why I'm saying we can have something to do with it, but not directly.
Right. We're not the ones writing the law that sends the money in this direction or that.
That's right. So we're not held responsible for how they use it. All right. Now, let me give you an example. Think of it this way. If I hire a plumber to fix a leak and he charges $150 to come out and fix this leak,
right?
So I pay him $150, and he goes and uses $50 of that for drugs. Or maybe he goes to a strip club and uses another $25 or whatever.
Right.
All right. Am I culpable for that? No. Right? That's on him.
That's on
not
him.
me.
That's a good
illustration.
illustration.
Am I supposed to screen everything that right? I mean,
Yeah, no, I mean, if that's great. That's a great illustration. Of course, some will say and hear this and say, well, it's different. I mean, if a plumber tells you ahead of time that it'll be $150 and he will use some of it for drugs, then that analogy would be how what we say the government's doing with it.
Right, because we know they're going to use some of it for that.
Right, because he's telling you, and he's saying, see, you got to tell me where it's going to be spent before I'll pay you.
Right, yeah. So, and I understand that. And I would say, look, there might be a single, man or woman out there that doesn't have a child or spouse to help take care of, right? So they say, hey, I'm going to be the example. I'm not going to pay. Okay, if you feel God calling you to do that, then, fine, do it. And when you go to jail, just know that is how it went, and you're going to be the example. If God's calling you to do that, well, then, you have to obey him. But this, again, is where I think, that wisdom is needed, because where is that going to end?
Right.
Right? So again, while this is not, in my opinion, just real cut and dry, like, of course you have to pay taxes, or no, absolutely, I'm not paying. I mean, there's a lot more to think about.
Yeah.
When we talk about this.
And then what ways are we able to resist, right?
Right.
Within reason. Like how do we process all that? It's a more complicated issue than just clearly one way or the other. And I mean, the Old Testament gives us a lot of insight on that as well. But as Snerdley said, I think we'll have to wait until next episode
time for that.
Yeah, for that. But I think we could possibly get in the Inquisition here. So let me turn into the vault. Let me turn into the vault. All right, hold on a second. All right. Oh, okay, good. I've got here in my formerly East Coast wing-stained fingers the Inquisition. And it says, yes, after all of this difficult musing on taxes and what Christians should do, this might be needed. So it says, should a pastor take a sabbatical? Should a pastor take a sabbatical?
Yeah, so, should a pastor take a sabbatical, or, is different maybe than asking, can a pastor take a sabbatical?
Well, yeah, that's a good clarification.
Yeah, so I would say this, that, the Bible doesn't give us any specifics on that, right? Mm-hmm. Now, churches see this differently. There's some churches that have it written in every 5 years or whatever, a pastor has to take, a 1 month sabbatical in addition to any vacation time and all that. Some of them even have, a 2 month sabbatical written in after X amount of years and this and that. I think it really depends, I think a lot of people in churches are a little bit afraid of the idea of a sabbatical because they've been involved in a church where the pastor went on a sabbatical and never came back.
Or sabotage happened during the sabbatical.
Well, right, and that's where the pastor then a lot of times on his side is a little concerned about taking a sabbatical because okay, now you're kind of gone.
Right.
Now, I mean, you don't necessarily have to be out of town for the whole thing, but that's when, if there's a faction in your church that wants to kind of get you out, weed you out, that's when those sort of things, can happen.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I know I've had over the years, thankfully nothing recent, but and you've had a front row seat to all of this, but I've had some issues where that have occurred when I've been on 1 week vacation.
As
soon as you're not even past the state line.
Yeah.
And people step up and right. So from both a pastor's perspective and a church's, some of the congregants, there are some who are leery because they've had some situations like that. Now, there are different types of sabbaticals too, right? Some is just, hey, this is just rest. Mm-hmm. Some it's just a of writing.
Right,
So
for a book or some...
Yeah, you've put the material together, so your schedule's going to be a little different, but you might go travel with the family, but you're taking X amount of time to write. So there's some different things. But I would say this. I would say that it is – I don't think there's anything – like the Bible doesn't command it, nor does it prohibit it. So, I mean,
Right.
I think it's something that there might come a time where a congregation looks, particularly if a pastor – if they've just lost a spouse or their spouse is going through, let's say cancer treatment or something like that, or they've lost a child, or they're going through something like that.
Right.
It might be other leaders in the church, or maybe some concerned folks in the congregation who lovingly say, hey, you know what? We want to give you, man, that's a lot to deal with all that.
Right.
And then be sober-minded, like Timothy says an elder should be, right? Be sober-minded to be able to come and preach to us and deal with the things you have to deal with each week.
Right.
And with counseling, discipleship. It might be wise there to go and say, hey, here's what we want to do. We want to give you, this time off.
Right.
So in situations like that, I think it's good.
Sure.
And can be helpful. So it can be very helpful. Absolutely. I know one brother, for instance, that I think was pretty much ready to walk away from a church. And, the church said, hey, take a month. And, I think they gave them like $5,000 or $6,000 for the family to take a trip, use it how they wanted, kind of on a trip thing. And he was pretty much ready to leave the church, and then the Lord worked through that, and I think we're about 10 years down the road now, and he's still at the same church. So there's an example where it really worked well.
It went well, sure.
This guy was kind of burned out and that sort of thing. So, but I think you have to educate the church on it if you're going to do that, because some people think, well, wait a minute, I don't get, I'm lucky if I get a week, a year, maybe I get 2 weeks, but a whole month, and we're going to pay him, because they need to understand that when you're in the ministry, you're not, I used to do construction, right? And okay, I get what I get done during the day.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what? We didn't get all the shingles on the roof, or there's a hole in the roof we didn't get the repair. You know what? It may or may not rain, but we're just going to throw this tarp over it and go home. Well, you know what? I'm not going to lose any sleep over this tarp that's on this roof. It's going to do its job. It's going to keep water from getting in. And when we get back, we'll put the shingles on, right? Well, that's a completely different world than I just met with someone. Their marriage is falling apart. Their life is falling apart. They're suicidal maybe, or this or that. And now I'm supposed to go home and just turn it off like a tarp over a hole in a roof.
Right.
Well, you can't do that.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't wear it on yourself either to the point to where your family doesn't get your attention and stuff, right?
Right.
So, I mean, there's a balance. But my point is just that spiritual matters and what you're dealing with in the ministry, there's a certain weight and a certain taxation on your body, your soul.
Yeah.
You're just in your entire being that there isn't in a lot of other jobs. And I'm not putting down our hammerheads that are working hard days and are tired after the day. I'm just simply saying it's different.
Yeah. There's a burden.
It's heavier.
Yeah.
It's eternal in the same way that the hole in the roof isn't.
Right.
Okay. And so that can take a toll on you.
Well, Paul even talks about that in 2 Corinthians, right? He goes through the beatings, left for almost dead, shipwrecked, on and on. But like the pinnacle of
it's not
his...
that bad for us here in America as pastors, thankfully. But
but then at the end of it, he says, the burden of all the churches.
Yeah, that's right.
And the people and their needs.
Yeah.
I think it's not... I think one of the things we like to say is that ministry is not for the faint of heart.
Absolutely.
It is hard. And so you can understand why some people maybe need either on the brink of burnout, and a sabbatical could be helpful.
Yeah, so I think it could be. And in addition, I've spoken to other pastors who I'm thinking of 3 in particular I'm saying over the last 15 years, whatever, who stepped down from their church. There weren't any major problems. They were just, they're tired, whatever, time for a change. They stepped down from their churches, and all three of them mentioned to me, they said, I think had I just taken some time off, i.e. sabbatical, a month to 3 months, whatever, that I would not have stepped down.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting.
But I really needed that break, and boy, I kind of wish maybe I didn't do that now. But if I just had that, so I do think they can be, helpful, and are helpful in many circumstances. But there need to be some parameters put on there. And again, I say, the people need to be educated,
right?
And then it just needs to be said up front, that here are the parameters. Here's what they're doing. Here's what this time is for. And I think with the other leaders of the church, the pastor needs to make it clear, hey, if during this time I'm interviewing with other churches or other ministries, like if I'm taking the paid time off you're giving me to figure out how to leave you, I need to be upfront with that.
Yeah, right. I would think so.
Right. Or if the church, is working towards, hey, or the leader, some of the other leaders are thinking, we need to replace him, and that needs to be said too, right? But of course, in a healthy environment, you're not keeping those secrets from one another. You're having those discussions anyway, right?
Right. So I guess we could say that there's certainly a right way to do it, and there can certainly be a wrong way to do it, which would be detrimental to everyone involved.
Yeah, and I'm speaking not from personal experience because I haven't taken one. Now we did, I did put in place with Brother Don, who's been with the Lord a number of years. I asked him to work on a policy for the church, and I think it was like you get a month after 5 years, and it might be like after 10 years, you get 2 months, and then every 5 years you can have the kind of a 2-month sabbatical.
Yeah.
Paid sabbatical. And, I had him put that in, not necessarily for me, but because it's kind of hard when you're a pastor to say, hey, let's put this policy in or this in when it helps you.
Right.
But I did that thinking that, hey, this is really good, because the next guy that comes along, they're going to look at, or he should be looking at, for his own care and for his family, how much does this church care about me? So they're going to look at all of that.
Sure.
And so to see that it's written in here, not that it's mandatory, but that will give you that, I think is helpful and good. We did the same thing like with, a doctorate. I funded mine, but I was in a cohort of 12 guys, and 10 of the guys, their church was paying for their doctorate. Now, they had certain stipulations where you have to stay the next 5 years.
Sure, right.
Or else you have to pay 20% back for each year. That sort of thing, right? And I remember going there, and I felt bad for I was through a pity party in my mind. I was like, this isn't right. They're not, But, and maybe they would have if I asked, right? But I just said, okay, I'm not, the right thing to do is not worry about me, but what about the next guy? So talked with Don, and, we put something in place, for the next guy that comes where he could do some doctoral work.
Sure.
And the church would pay for that, So, anyway, I think these things, like I said, can be helpful. And I think pastors should not hesitate, if they need one, if something's going on in their life, to be able to, say that.
Yeah.
The problem for a pastor, right? We can have a lot of issues, but, you have an off week, or you're really, Satan is just, beating you up. You have a flesh, right? unless it's a scheduled week where you already have somebody scheduled to preach or something like that. You know?
Sunday's coming.
Right, Sunday's coming, and I mean, what if you got up and said, well, I'm not preaching this week because, just some things came up and my heart's really not right to preach this week. So I'm not going to. So, Ryan's preaching this week or Bob's preaching this week or what, right? If you said that, and you ought to be able to do that. Like now, if this is happening like once a month, we've got a problem, right?
Right.
But I mean, that you ought to be. But now, if you do that in our culture, in our day and age, what do people think? Well, that's well, what did he do? What's going on? What's right?
Yeah. They go worst case scenario. Always.
So that's like the New Testament says, confessing sins to one another. Yeah, try putting an open mic in church service and let that, right? I don't even know exactly what all was going on with that.
That's a great way to unify the church,
right.
Maintain the unity.
But I mean, we're just not, that doesn't go well in our culture and how we are and everything, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so getting back to the original question, which I think is a great question, is, I don't think there's anything against it. Should it be mandatory? I don't know about that either, but it certainly can be beneficial in certain settings.
Yeah.
And let me just say this too, because people always think there's subliminal messages. This really was a question asked, and this is not. I'm not crying out for sabbatical.
Right. Yeah. No. This was a question that was asked by one of the hammerheads.
So this isn't like we're planning this so people say Mike or Ryan need a sabbatical. No, that's you've got 5 kids running around. You probably need one more than me.
No, we're in it to win it, baby.
But anyway, although I don't know if staying home with 5 kids counts as a sabbatical, huh?
Right. Yeah, I hear that.
Anyway,
so all right. Well, Snerdley says we've come to a conclusion here. So we will see you in 168 hours.